The following episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television.
Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. Have to admit up front, I'm a little frustrated this morning. I'm trying to figure out how Bernie can continue to do this dance he's been doing, appeasing the DNC establishment on one hand, and appealing directly to his populist voter base on the other hand. And I've been thinking about it. How do we get this to happen with our side of it, the Bernie or Bust side, that he can't really talk about or even notice, and his side where he's telling us, like last time, vote for Hillary Clinton. And on our side, none of us Bernie or Busters are going to listen to that. We can't vote directly for Hillary Clinton. And we listen to his wife, Jane, tell us, don't listen to me. His wife tweets to us from Bernie, indirectly, don't listen to me. And so we aren't. But we're at this point now, right before the Iowa caucuses, where we need some help here from Bernie. So I know Bernie isn't going to watch this, but here's a little frustration. I want to express that directly to Bernie, a little bit of frustration, and then some ideas from my point of view and from the organization I represent, Revolt against Plutocracy, some of our ideas. Now, I may be getting in trouble, but it's to that point. We're right at the edge. We're on the knife's edge, and we need to make sure this works. And we'll never have another chance. And that's my excuse. So the first idea is from Keaton Weiss. Keaton is from Do Dissidents. It's a great website, a great podcast. His articles are awesome, as are Russell Doblar's articles. So let's go to Keaton's article about the establishment Stop Sanders strategy is to troll the race and invoke the ugliness of 2016. I want to start here because I want to make the case to Bernie that he needs to not worry so much about the insiders and focus more on the loyal base of populists, us ragtag Bernie or Busters, and just burners in general. But I'd say with the latest developments from the Hillary camp, a lot of burners are turning into Bernie or Busters just because of that. A few weeks ago, as we entered the year 2020, Bernie Sanders' campaign was surging. Endorsements were pouring in, poll numbers were rising, and the betting markets were starting to respond accordingly, placing Sanders' chances just 0.6 percentage points behind Joe Biden's to win the Democratic nomination as of January 12th. But then things started happening. That evening, video surfaced of Elizabeth Warren accusing Bernie of sending his volunteers out to trash her, in reference to a phone banking script that mentioned her potential vulnerabilities in a general election. The next day, CNN broke a story that Bernie had allegedly told Warren in a private 2018 meeting that he didn't think a woman could win the presidency. The following evening, that very network hosted the final Democratic debate before the Iowa caucuses. We all know how that went. And just this week, Hillary Clinton added her contribution to the Stop Sanders onslaught by doubling down in a Hollywood Reporter interview on comments she had made in an upcoming documentary about herself, in which she said, in reference to Sanders, "Nobody likes him. Nobody wants to work with him. He got nothing done. He was a career politician. It's all just baloney, and I feel so bad that people got sucked into it." Bernie supporters aren't known to take these things particularly well, and we didn't. Hashtags such as Never Warren and CNN is trash flooded the Twitterverse immediately following the debate, and of course, backlash against Hillary's comments was as harsh and swift as you'd come to expect from us. Many progressives are taking these developments as a win for the movement, pointing out that voters by and large didn't buy Warren's smears, saw through CNN's shameful debate performance, and are wishing that Hillary Clinton would just stay out of this primary season altogether. And while those individual claims all seem to be more true than not, the sum total doesn't seem to me like a win for the Sanders campaign or the progressive movement as a whole. And this is where I disagree. I think that it was a win, and I think that appeasing the insiders, especially of the DNC, is a mistake. Some of us get a little nervous at being so Bernie bro-ish when there are the Bernie sisters being just as Bernie bro-ish, and there are lots of people who are desperate for change, who are becoming more and more Bernie bro-ish. And I'm saying, and there's a debate on each side, we have these debates with Revolt against Plutocracy people, but every time when we've come down on the side of appeasing the white, affluent insiders, we come down on the wrong side. This is a leverage movement. We're trying to hold people's feet to the fire and let them know that these desperate times call for desperate measures. The DNC is rigging it again. They never talk about unity unless it's to get people to vote for corporatist, neoliberal sock puppets. They don't want unity when it comes to uniting behind Bernie. It's all a big mess, and we can't expect Bernie's niceness to prevail against the DNC's nastiness. A lot of us have been nasty for Bernie. There's a Facebook group called Bash for Bernie, and that's good. But we need a little help from Bernie himself, I think, now. I think we've been tiptoeing along this line long enough. I think it's time to step down on one side or the other. And I, for one, as a Bernie or bust person, feel that we all need to be less appeasing to the insiders. Now, Keaton goes on and talks about polling data, the real clear polling data, that show maybe a slight drop in Bernie's support over the last few days. And I think I don't think the polls are robust enough to deal with that. But the betting data are different. I think we can talk about the betting data. And so if we're talking about these betting data instead of the polling data, then this next point that Keaton makes may not be valid. Going on with the article, the answer is that the establishment Stop Sanders strategy was never to actually convince a majority of Democratic primary voters that Bernie himself is some closet misogynist who's out to undermine female candidates and destroy the party from within. They know this is too difficult a task to accomplish because, contrary to what the corporate media would have you believe, Bernie is actually the most liked of all the candidates in the running. Rather, their approach now is to simply troll the race and create a toxic climate that invokes the memory of the 2016 primary in the hopes that this alone will scare people off who might now be leaning toward supporting Sanders. The plan is to deter even those who like Bernie from supporting him by simply making them ask themselves if they actually have the stomach to endure a repeat of the Bernie versus Hillary bloodbath. And there are squeamish voters, but I would say that if you're looking at the data from Elizabeth's voters and Pete's voters, they are affluent, they are comfortable, and of course they're a little more squeamish and a little less pugilistic than people who are more desperate financially, people who need to ration their insulin to keep it coming, people who are dying because of that, people who can't afford health care, people who go bankrupt because of their medical bills. This is what we've got from the desperate side. And so we are less squeamish about getting forceful here. We don't mind the confrontation. But if we're averse to confrontation, if we're averse to risk, and older people are more risk averse, the people who can in good conscience vote for Biden or Warren typically are older and are more risk averse and are more comfortable and would like to stay that way. And so we think, okay, in the primaries, they're the ones who vote, so we need to appease them. But I think we're past that point. I think it's damn the torpedoes time. Going on with Keaton's article. In this scheme, Elizabeth Warren's failing campaign is a perfect proxy for the Clinton campaign of 2016. That's true. When Warren played the victim card against Bernie, of course his supporters would react with anger and disgust. When she followed that up with a malicious, slanderous smear about his having made sexist comments to her over a year ago that she all of a sudden decided to bring up out of the blue, we were apoplectic. The fury of the online Bernie supporters then allowed the media to recycle the Orwellian Bernie bro narrative from 2016, which again only compounds the ire of the Sanders base, which is, of course, the most diverse of any candidates in the field. And it's not risk averse. It's young, it's black and brown, and every other color, purple. And we were right to be angry at what had transpired between Sanders, Warren, and CNN, just as we're right to be angry with Hillary Clinton over her latest injection of venom into our political discourse. The problem, though, is that the Stop Sanders establishment knows we're right, and they know that most people know we're right, but they don't care because they know most people don't care either. Because unlike in 2016, when, however ugly it got, voters were stuck with the binary choice of Clinton versus Sanders and therefore had to stick it out till the end of that fight and choose one side over the other, no matter how turned off they became by the nastiness of it all, this time they have an out. That out is Joe Biden. And so by trolling the primary and pouring gasoline on the Sanders versus Warren fire and the Sanders versus the media fire and even the Sanders versus Clinton fire, they hope people will choose to just stay away from Sanders altogether because his presence alone will be responsible for conjuring up tension and hostility no matter his opponent and no matter who's actually at fault. In other words, fostering a toxic environment around the Sanders campaign, regardless of whether or not people actually blame Bernie for it, could be enough to get people to throw their hands up and say, I don't have the energy for this. I'm just going to vote for Biden. This puts us in a tough spot. On the one hand, we can't just let these smears against us and our candidate go unanswered. We have to respond forcefully. On the other hand, the more forcefully we respond, the easier it is for the establishment Democrats and their corporate media allies to scare people away from what they'll fear could be too bitter and divisive a fight before the all-important general election. So what do? Well, if you agree that the Stop Sanders strategy is to foment hostility between Sanders and all of his opponents, including, of course, the mainstream media, then the best thing you can do is explain this to undecided voters you encounter when phone banking, canvassing, or even just chatting online or in person with friends or family. Point out to people that these smears against Bernie are first of all dishonest and absurd on their face. Second, have nothing to do with his democratic socialist platform, which according to the same people lobbying these attacks is his biggest vulnerability. And third, and perhaps most importantly, are completely unprovoked. The Sanders campaign has been laser focused on their progressive agenda that speaks to the material needs of ordinary people, which is why they were surging in the first place. None of that has changed on their end. They're still in the midst of all of this insidious gossip mongering, trying to take the fight to Joe Biden over Social Security. In other words, those trying to convince you that Bernie Sanders is too toxic and divisive are themselves the purveyors of the very toxicity and divisiveness which they speak. Reassure these well-meaning voters that they have nothing to fear about our campaign. All we're trying to do is get them health care, housing, education, a livable planet, and a secure retirement. Those who oppose us, who oppose those ideals, and therefore smear Bernie and his supporters with slanderous bullshit, they're the toxic ones. So let's unpack a little bit of Keaton's argument. Part of his argument is based on the fact that polling may have gone down a little bit because of all of these toxic smears. And he mentioned the betting data as well as the polling data. Let me show you a little bit about the betting data that go against what he was saying, what he was arguing.
So the first state I want to take a look at here is going to be, of course, the Iowa caucus, which is the first result that we're going to be heading towards. And they're giving Bernie Sanders the best chance to go on to win at plus 125. And I'm going to convert these American odds into implied probability to give you a better sense of where they're telling you the chances of these candidates to go on and win. So with this implied probability, we're at around 44.4%. That's the odds that they're giving Sanders to go on and win the state. So then we have Joe Biden in second place at plus 175, which is around a 36% implied probability. And then Buttigieg at plus 450, which is around an 18% chance to win the state. And then Elizabeth Warren at plus 650, or around a 13% chance. And I don't have much in the way of disagreement with any of these numbers, especially with the polls that have come out from Iowa over the past month or so have either been more bullish on Bernie Sanders or more bullish on Joe Biden, whereas Buttigieg and Warren, so specifically for Buttigieg, more so around November, he had a lot of very positive Iowa polls. That hasn't been quite as much the case in recent results that we've gotten, so he's taken a bit of a step back with the odds. And then also Elizabeth Warren, she was looking really strong, particularly in Iowa back in months like September and October, but she's also taken a step back. And as we get closer and closer to primary season, it looks like it's going to potentially be a 1-2 horse race at the top between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, with the centrist candidate and those individuals coalescing behind Biden, whereas the progressive wing of the party behind Bernie Sanders. That's possibly what we're heading towards. And essentially it would be a replay of what we had in 2016 between Sanders and Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, of course, taking that mantle as the more establishment centrist type candidate.
And we know what happens when we run an establishment candidate against a populist candidate. We've done that experiment already.
Those are the Iowa numbers. The next state in this process, of course, would be the New Hampshire primary. And Bernie Sanders also the favorite here, but by a little bit better of an odds at minus 150, which is a 60% implied probability. Joe Biden at plus 250 is around a 28% chance to go on and win the state. Buttigieg at plus 700, which is...
I'm glad he converted them into percentages, because you can see Bernie has a whopping lead over Biden in New Hampshire. So I think the polling recent, the last few days, I think they're a little blip on the screen. But I think the betting data are considering the last at least 6 months, and they're pulling it all together. And the people who bet on elections, they need accurate odds. The bookies, the odds makers, they need to be accurate. So what I'm saying is the betting markets are bullish on Bernie, and I think there's good reason for that. And so if Bernie is positioned not only to defeat Trump down the road in November, but if he's positioned now to defeat Biden, I think that we're in good shape when we're confronting these smears from Hillary and Obama world and Neera Tanden and John Cowan and David Brock and on, all of the Stop Sanders people. I think we don't have to link arms with billionaires to appease them. And they don't care about us anyway. I mentioned linking arms with billionaires because that actually happened. We've got a couple of billionaires in this lineup. I'll just show it to you and let you come to your own conclusions.
A rare sight on the 2020 Democratic campaign trail. The presidential candidates all linking arms and shaking hands to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
It kind of bothers me. Now there you see what we saw recently, this spat. Let's not do this now. But we see them, Bernie and Elizabeth that is, right next to each other on the line. There's this huge amount of symbolism whenever we see them photographed together. And I'd say this picture right here is more like it than the one where they're linked arm in arm walking along in solidarity and unity. And I'll make that argument in a moment.
After a week-long feud about electability, progressive Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders appeared to reconcile, even as Sanders' critics said he dismissed sexism in politics.
And do you think that gender is still an obstacle for female politicians?
Look, the answer is yes, but I think everybody has their own sets of problems. All right, I'm 78 years of age. That's a problem.
Warren, when pressed by reporters, didn't take the bait.
I have no further comment on this. I have been friends with Bernie for a long time. We work together on many, many issues, and I've said all I'm going to say.
The progressive ceasefire comes as a new fight brews, this time between Sanders and former Vice President Joe Biden.
What is your stance on Social Security?
And here I can't even watch it because they go on to say that Biden was right, that the video was doctored and didn't accurately represent Joe Biden's stances on Social Security over the years, not to mention Medicaid, veterans benefits, and Medicare. And he's been an austerity budget balancer all the way through the Clinton years, all the way through the Bush years, and all the way on from the beginning of his austerity-ridden neoliberal corporate sock puppet candidacy. So that's what we have with Joe Biden. So they let him off the hook in this video. They say, oh yeah, it was doctored and Bernie was smearing Joe. And that's just not true. In all of the fact-checking, Joe Biden has been attacking Social Security. What we see is that when austerity candidates, austerity politicians get their way, the money flows from the people upwards. It doesn't trickle down. And so austerity means taking money out of workers' pockets and giving it to the oligarchy. That's Joe Biden, which you'd expect from PBS. Wow, I used to love PBS. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. PBS absolutely sucks. They've been doing horrible things. They're at least as complicit as MSDNC and Clinton News Network. Meanwhile, progressives are getting nervous. They see Bernie holding arms with Elizabeth Warren and Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg, and they're like, what? What are you doing, Bernie? And they make some valid points. Jimmy Dore is losing his shit, and so is Michael Tracy. They are real progressives. They have true progressive bona fides, and they're upset, rightfully, I think, to see this show of unity. We need to be unified with the grubby populace. We don't need to be unified with billionaires. Here's a little bit of that argument.
Coherent anti-war message. Who knows what's going to happen with Iran? right? Maybe it flares up again. Maybe the state of war that we're now in escalates to a broader conflict.
So the point here is anti-war. You could make it in terms of the economy. You could make it in terms of the environment. You could say that we're in big trouble progressive-wise, no matter what we do when we are working shoulder to shoulder with billionaires and their cronies. So they go on to talk about Tulsi, and she's been solidly anti-war all the way through, and that's what we need. But we don't need just anti-war. We need all of the progressive agenda. And we know that the corporate billionaires and their cronies are not progressive, and their agenda will not work this way. So why are we even bothering with them? I guess we're still trying to walk this delicate line between the DNC and the way they want to do things and their typical, comfortable, affluent, educated voters and the way grubby populists would want to do things. Let Michael go on here a little bit.
Right, and if Bernie can be dismissed as just opposing it because he's against Trump or he wants to help the interests of the Democratic Party, I don't think that the independents and even some of the Trump allied people who maybe would be receptive to a thoroughgoing anti-war message, I don't think that they're going to be drawn to the cause of Bernie in as high numbers now because of all the concessions that he's made, and it's unfortunate. So that's why, again, I'm sort of struck when I see Tulsi running these anti-war ads in New Hampshire, because she knows that there's an opening there within at least a section of the electorate for somebody who is speaking from a standpoint of principle, not tethered to the interests of any one political party, who can say that I understand that you are disillusioned with how things have turned out, and I can provide an alternative to you that isn't necessarily through the framework of just restoring the Democratic Party to power.
So Tulsi knows that she has to keep running to the left of the corporate Democrats. And she's actually running to the left of Bernie when it comes to war. And I don't see why we need to do that. I don't see why we can't run, Bernie that is, can't run as far left as Tulsi is running. I don't like this idea of pivoting back and forth depending on whether we're trying to court primary voters or general election voters. I know they're not the same. I know it's a different demographic, but we need to work on getting everybody who's truly left in Bernie's camp, and we can't divide the progressive vote not only between Bernie and Elizabeth, we can't divide it between Bernie and Tulsi. And I'd say with Bernie, I don't think he can afford to be thought of as a moderate when it comes to lefties. I think lefties need to not just hold their nose and vote for Bernie as the lesser evil. Bernie is solidly anti-war, solidly for the environment, solidly for women, for LGBTQ rights, for all of the things that true lefties care about. So when he's playing nice with the DNC, it makes some of those on the left nervous. Here's a letter I wrote to Bernie about this. Dear Bernie, we the people are your truest friends and we need you now. Dear Bernie, please keep speaking directly to your base. It's deeply frustrating watching you in any way attempt to appease or apologize to Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Elizabeth Warren, and the other party insiders. They don't give a fuck about you. They are not your friends. Your small dollar donations are a huge threat to them and their way of life. You are a threat to every insider in DC, whether it be to politicians, pundits, analysts, lobbyists, or anyone who knows how to go along to get along. I repeat, they are not your friends, and appeasing them won't get you any votes. Some of your true friends get nervous when you do unity videos with billionaires. These snakes you are walking arm in arm with not only despise you, they despise the American people. Please remember, we the people need you right now. With only a small handful of exceptions, everyone in both parties are in it to keep their big money donors happy. We the people don't need their friendship. We don't need to appease them. Those who are stupid, selfish, or deceitful enough to follow Joe, Elizabeth, Pete, Barack, or Hillary don't deserve appeasement either.
The unity we need is among all people who truly want to disempower the plutocrats. By definition, this cannot include those who are being paid to block you in the primaries. Defeating Donald Trump is not enough. You've said that yourself. We need to defeat the big money interests against whom you've spoken for decades. That means that Elizabeth is not your friend because she is not our friend. She is on the dole. She is being paid by the billionaires we seek to disempower. Joe and Pete are not your friends either because they are not the friends of we the people. They know who butters their bread. It is not us. They don't care about us. Please, Bernie, this is crunch time. When a blow lands on your opponents, who oppose us as well, please don't pull the next punch. Keep beating them up. Don't relent. Guarding your left flank will get you across the finish line first. You have no obligation to the right flank. In many ways, especially with regard to trade agreements and interventionary wars, they are the primary enemy. They are the dangerous ones. They are dangerous because of their ability to hide behind woke signaling and identity politics. We Bernie brothers and sisters need your strong leadership right now. We can't land all of the blows ourselves against your political opponents. The time to clearly separate yourself from them is right now. We do not wish again to see you tell us to endorse a corporate Democrat. Once is more than enough. Let's all do what it takes right now to get you the nomination and then to get you into the White House. Sincerely, and with all best wishes, your truest friends and most ardent admirers, working class Americans. P.S. Please choose a vice president who is at least as much of an existential threat to the DNC as you are. We don't want you to end up the victim of a botched robbery. Please make no deals that leaves anyone acceptable to Wall Street as your running mate. One of the most powerful points to make in all of this is that the DNC insiders are not afraid of Trump. They would much rather have Trump than have Bernie. And that's where all of the white, affluent, comfortable, suburban Democrats come in. They don't want Trump, but they listen to the corporate media. They listen to the corporate sock puppet pundits and politicians tell them that they should vote for Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren because, Bernie is so divisive and all of this other bullshit. But what we need to keep in mind is that they would much rather have Trump than Bernie. Here's an analyst on the Hill Rising who puts these thoughts together really well.
This goes to something that people on the left have said all the time. The Democratic establishment would rather see Trump win than Bernie. They would rather see, the rise of reactionary forces than cede any ground to the left because the left poses more of an existential threat to what the new Democrats have made out of the Democratic Party over the past 30 years. And that actually goes back to Hillary's thing about, no one wanting to work with him and Bernie getting nothing done and no one liking him. Again, I don't know how in this political moment you would imagine that the millions of working people who are being screwed over by this system and who see the Washington establishment as kind of the main arbiters of that system. If you say no one likes this guy, in Washington, how is that a bad message for people? They're going to be like, yeah, good. I don't want someone that you people like. I don't want someone that you get a beer with because I've seen, what y'all's, agenda is.
Exactly.
And another thing is like...
My only regret is that he doesn't welcome their hatred more.
Right.
He should
be
more...
bathe in it.
He needs to understand that, it is, in this town, more or less, him against everyone else. And they are not going to treat him with the same courtesy that he relentlessly treats them, and it's part of why people do love him. It's part of why he is the most popular senator in the country. But at some point, he's got to recognize these people are out for blood. They're not your friend. They hate you, and they will always hate you.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, and I think this is also why it's so important to understand Bernie in a larger context, right? To understand him, as we've said many times, as he himself is always kind of reiterating, that it is not just about him. It is about his people. It is about bringing, everyone in. And, when Clinton and others are saying that, no one in Washington liked Bernie and that no one would work with him, what they are saying is that we, the new Democrats, took over this party. We, made everybody toe the line. Bernie was the one who would not. But now, this young wave of progressives is running for office. Working class people are getting involved in the political process. It's not going to just be Bernie in there being the lone voice, and that scares the crap out of them.
Because it threatens their power, and it threatens their gig flow for all the consultants in this town. I mean, really, that's part of what it comes down to here.
It really does.
But also, Max, imagine if Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard even hinted at the remote possibility that they wouldn't support the Democratic nominee. The hair that would be on fire on Twitter, people would be freaking out, rage raining down upon him, and yet here, Hillary, I'm not sure she's going to back Bernie.
Right. I mean, it gives the whole game away, although they've done it millions of times before. I don't know how many more times.
So Maximilian is right. We need to get behind the idea that progressive values will carry the day. The DNC insiders don't care about Bernie, as nice as he is to them, and I know that that's part of his appeal, as Crystal said, to the voters. The voters love Bernie because he's nice, but at the same time, we can't make compromises with people who are compromising the people. We the people. Bernie loves the people, and he tolerates the insiders, and he knows how to work with them, which is nerve-wracking, and he's good at it. I don't know how he does it. He keeps tiptoeing along, and it's like he's walking in a minefield. I don't know how he could keep going all these years walking in that minefield, but he has. But at this crucial moment in history, and we'll never get another shot at it, we need to keep going for progressive values. Our planet is in danger. People are rioting all over the world. Neoliberalism isn't working. We need to keep going in a progressive direction. And there's going to be a point where we say to the DNC insiders, even if people's hair does catch on fire, we need to make sure that we keep going in the left direction. And that's what will save the day. So Bernie, we the people need you. Please don't get caught with your elbows too close to the elbows of those billionaire cronies. We love you, man.
Get on board the Bernie bus train. Come get on board the Bernie bus train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back. Oh, get on board the Bernie bus train.
The preceding episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television.